The penultimate presentation for this afternoon. We're going to New York City. We are going to be talking sports stadiums. I was going to say football stadium, but I know this is a multi-functioning stadium. We're talking stadium. We're going to talk about the urban stadium and the lack thereof in current typology, and the way to correct that. And Peter Cunningham is proposing some innovative ways to deal with large structures in the city. This committee was comprised of, I can't help it, of Ming Hugh, James Tillman, and myself as chair. Peter, it's time to play football.
Thank you all for being here. I'd like to give a special thanks to my classmates and peers, to my committee members, Professor Hugh and Tillman, especially to Professor Kelly for his guidance and wisdom, and to my wife for all of her support. So thank you all. Let's begin. Stadiums. Are they within the realm of what we should be talking about at an architecture school? I think they are. There's something fundamentally human about gathering in large groups. We are social animals. We come together, we enjoy these experiences of being with like-minded people who are there to support the same things we are, and we're energized just by being in crowds. And so I think we need to be critical about how we design and how we build our stadiums. When I think about stadiums, I think of the ones that I've been to, that I know and love. And for me, these stadiums are Wrigley Field in Chicago, Fenway Park in Boston, Stamford Bridge in London. I have fond memories of going to these places, and I think as we tease these apart and look at them architecturally and urbanistically, there's some things that they all have in common that can be applied to any future stadium that we might consider. So first of all, they offer a facade. They don't just show their bones, they present their best face to the public. They dignify the presence, the public sphere with their facade. Secondly, they use their facade to shape urban space. Whether, as in the case of Wrigley Field or Stamford Bridge, it's an urban plaza, or at Fenway Park, it's just a street right outside the stadium. The building itself is making that space a desirable place to be, and an amenity to the stadium and to the city at the same time. All of these stadiums also are in harmony with the context. They aren't too small in the downtown, they aren't too big in the suburbs, they're just right in the neighborhood. In fact, if you were just judging it based on scale alone, you might not even be able to tell that it was a stadium, except for the dignified facade that we've talked about that separates it, sets it apart as a landmark. All of these stadiums make for a pedestrian-friendly environment, and they do this by clever use of street hierarchy. Rather than placing a stadium right on a freeway or on a highway or a high street or a main thoroughfare, they're insulated from that place with secondary streets, with alleys that allow the thoroughfares to operate freely as they would normally, as if nothing was going on. And it allows, similar to Fenway Park, it allows those streets to be closed off, and when there are no games going on, those can be streets. When there are games going on, those can be just pedestrian environments. And lastly, they aren't segregated from the rest of the city. They're fully integrated into the life of the city. They're not cordoned off with all of the other movie theaters and shopping malls and convention centers. They're just one piece of a larger puzzle that is the city. So, synthesizing all of these ideas about what makes a good stadium, I've got two suggestions. One is that rather than like on the top, considering the stadium as a plaza, as a room with 4 walls that have grandstands looking in to a park where an event is happening. It is this grand room that is great for enjoying something, but it is also 4 walls to 4 other rooms outside of the stadium. And those are equally important to the role of the stadium in the civic life. And secondly, I want us to consider that the stadium is one part of the larger, what I'm calling the park and recreation transect. There are many pieces to this. First of all, I want to say the stadium is a building, but it's also a piece of the park. It's a place where we sit and watch people play sports on a field. And so we must rightfully consider where in this transect the stadium does belong. So we need a place to put this stadium. Where are we going to test out all of these ideas? An arena, a playground for these ideas. I naturally gravitate to New York because it is a place with a population that could easily justify building a mega stadium. It has the infrastructure of transportation to get people, millions of people, in fact, in and out of the city. And there are parts of New York, while Manhattan is unique in its density compared to the rest of America, other parts of New York, such as the area I've chosen to zoom in on, is Red Hook, New York, which has a lot in common with the rest of American cities, particularly the post-industrial cities of America. So Red Hook has water surrounding it on 3 sides. It has a large expressway that's, in a way, segregating it from the rest of the cities. It has a lot of problems. The grid sort of breaks down as it comes to the water. There's a lot of derelict, unused buildings. There is a large park in the center of Red Hook, the Red Hook Park. It is a beautiful place, and it has a vast amount of recreational fields for the neighborhood to use. It also has this recreation center designed by Robert Moses back in the 1930s. And at the center of the park is this Red Hook grain terminal, which is a building that's been sitting vacant since the 1960s. The soil of the site is all contaminated. It all needs to be remediated, and they're going parcel by parcel through the park to clean it up. Architecturally, there's a lot of very interesting Dutch colonial architecture on the west side of the site. On the east side of the site, however, there is pretty much only this corrugated steel and cinder block warehouse building. That's the only typology that exists. So when we think long term, we have to question whether that's the highest and best use of the land and whether that will survive the test of time. And lastly, I want to point out some environmental issues. Hurricane Sandy ravaged Red Hook because Red Hook was, when it was founded, was actually reclaimed land back in the 18th and 19th century. So it's very flat. It's only about 10 feet above sea level. And so whenever a storm comes in with 10, 15-foot waves, it completely inundates the neighborhood. On the east side of the site is the Gowanus Canal, which is 2 years into its 10-year-long Superfund cleanup. So while it's filthy and disgusting now, it will actually be a treasure and a gem for this part of the neighborhood, and it will drive value for development along it. So we have this issue now. We have these lofty goals for what a stadium in the city should be, and we have this place with all of its own particular problems. The question is, how does the stadium inform the rejuvenation and the cleaning up of this site, and how can it be the catalyst for new development? Well, first I want to step back and address the environmental issues. My proposal for the stadium is to bury it with the lower levels into the ground, and that's going to produce a lot of cut out of the ground, and all of that will need to be cleaned up. As I said, pretty much the entire site is contaminated soil, and anywhere new development occurs, all that soil is going to need to be cleaned as well. And so I propose taking all of that soil, using the Red Hook Grain Terminal building as a machine for cleaning it. There's a process by which you can add chemicals and some water. They mix together, they separate eventually, and clean soil comes out in the end. And then with that clean soil, instead of just shipping it away, placing it strategically about a quarter mile out from the edge of the land as a barrier that helps slow down the storm surges, as well as provide a habitat for sea life in between. Architecturally and urbanistically, the process is to link that historic street that you see on the north, Van Brunt Street of Red Hook, which is on the far west side of the neighborhood, to this new development on the east side of the neighborhood. And in between them, rather than being separated by this very large park, the Red Hook Park, the park is given a new form. It's brought in line with the grid at the edges and allowed to sort of be free and romantic on the inside of the park. And at the north end of the park are two plazas that link either end of the park, and an access is brought through, and that becomes the promenade that leads from the city to the stadium. We also need to think about how this place is being used. As I mentioned, or perhaps I didn't, forgive me, but the stadiums that we love, Fenway Park, Wrigley Field, those are all surrounded by residential uses primarily, with maybe just one retail street that goes by it. And so this needs to be heavily residential in order for the life and activity to continue throughout the non-game day events. The non-event days, rather. And then lastly, we need to consider both how the stadium connects to the city and the city to the stadium. So currently there's a metro stop about a half a mile away from where I'm proposing the stadium should be. There's a proposal for a streetcar to connect Brooklyns and Queens, and I'm suggesting the stop will be halfway between the stadium and the metro. There are ferry lines that come from Manhattan and from Long Island that could be brought further into the site, as well as a robust bike and bus network. All of these things are necessary to get people to the stadium and decrease the reliance on cars. So I want to, at this point, offer you a fly-through of the site so you can better understand how it's laid out and how things relate to each other. So you're coming up along the Erie Basin. There's recreational fields there. It opens up into this wide park with the Red Hook grain terminal building, the Henry Street Basin, and then the new neighborhood on the right, all culminating in this north or east-west axis with the basin brought further in, connecting Red Hook to the stadium. Now I want to take you on another fly-through through the east-west connection. So this is a street coming from the downtown Red Hook, Van Brunt Street, opening up into a plaza that would have restaurants and townhomes and apartments above it, into this basin where I imagine permeable paving on the side, and people can pull up and tailgate on game days before they're making their way in. There's a marina for water recreational activities. As we fly into the market plaza with a couple civic buildings and pavilion buildings where markets could be set up year-round. Leading into the stadium itself, where the plaza is greeted by the important facade. And so speaking of facades, I want us to consider that the facade is a tool for creating space, as I mentioned. There's three important facades and plazas that extend off of the stadium, as you can see here in the plan. The one on the east-west corridor, the one to the north, which would connect it to the metro, and the one to the south, which is part of a linear chain of parks connecting the entire Red Hook waterfront, and which is part of a master plan for the city to connect all of Brooklyns and Queens along the waterfront. We have to consider how these spaces should be flexible, how they should be able to be operated for the city when there's no game going on, and for the stadium when there is. So what you see in the hatch on the left image would be areas that would be secured, blocked off to vehicular traffic, but open to anybody who wanted to come in and walk in and enjoy the pregame activities. And then the darker green area would require you to have a ticket to get into that part of the stadium. And there are spaces even outside the stadium that can function as places to, more food vendors or shops. And then when the game is over and the stadium returns to its normal life, those buildings can function as restaurants and shops or offices throughout the rest of the day and the rest of the week. We have to consider how the schedule of the stadium works, that it shouldn't just have a busy season from September to December and then sit idle for 8 months. There ought to be all sorts of programs going on. The stadium, for this to happen, it needs to have a variety of events going on inside, whether it's a concert that blocks off one of the end zones, or whether it's soccer that uses curtains or tarps to block off the upper parts of the grandstand. The stadium needs to be flexible so it can be used by as many tenants as possible. And so I hope we can all agree that the stadium actually does have a place in the city, that it does belong in the neighborhood, that tools like using the facade to create a plaza and to dignify the public space in front of it are good, and that the stadium in the end can be a catalyst for change in the neighborhood. It can be the first mover, and at the end of the day can be a gym in that new neighborhood. So with that, I'd like to open it up for your questions. If you have any questions about the architecture or the design, I'd love to entertain those and to hear your thoughts and comments. So thank you.
Why not? Okay, no.
No, my questions are about the location of the stadium, in terms of blocking, eventually, let's say, the connection between the big, long lawn and the water. So the water is sort of something that you have to discover by yourself. The other thing is that I appreciate the fact that you consider the stadium a building with facade that make urban space. I think that's a very good starting point. I don't know if it doesn't have to look as a stadium necessarily. You know what I mean? It could be what you perceive from there. You see a building that could be a bank, it could be an institution of any kind, it could even be a museum, I don't know. So while the idea of a stadium is also a public building of a certain power, which has an architectural history of 2,500 years old, you know, start from the Colosseum to the various stadiums all over the world. And so this type of making a mimetic building, I think it could be slightly differentiated into something that is more becoming the central focal point. It is a central focal point in terms of access, but not in terms of architecture, I feel. The other problem I may see is I see a lot of good things. First of all, I have to say a lot of good things about the city planning, the idea of increasing the density in that part. But for example, this idea of sinking the stadium is good in terms of giving a scale that is not overwhelming. At the same time, nowadays we are talking a lot about climate change and the resiliency of building and locations and so on. And this is probably quite it goes a little bit in the opposite direction. I think it could create problems. Look at the water there and look at the stadium there. On the other side, I find that this axis is strong. I think it's nicely composed and has a lot of potential for creating a real neighbor, a real center in terms of classical urban park, in a way. That, in that sense, I think it's very, very nicely developed.
Can I address one comment you made? So that's a great point about it being sunk beneath the water. It was actually intentional. The idea is that the stadium could actually flood in an event and take it over, take on some of the pressure from the rest of the neighborhood. It could, essentially function as a bathtub, fill up. And fill up. Yes. It's all concrete. You know, the field would be ruined. You'd have to replace the field, but that would happen anyways, no matter what elevation it's at. So it can help mitigate some of the effects on the rest of the neighborhood.
I think yeah, sure. I think it would mitigate, but I think even for as much water that would take, I think a flood of the magnitude that New York saw, that would be a tiny thing compared to what could happen otherwise. But anyway, I share the concern that the field is sunk below the water. I do like that concept in general, but not for the site. If this was in a place that was not prone to flooding, absolutely, I think it's a great solution because it does reduce the scale of the facade outside and it makes for an otherwise gigantic facility to feel a little bit more contextual and the scale be a little bit friendlier with the buildings around it. So I like that, but not near the water this way. The other thing I'm looking at this, I really appreciate the fact that you created this promenade and this green space in the center. I am wondering about the scale of the space from facade to facade, a cross section through there. From what I see from these beautiful drawings, otherwise, I'm wondering, is that about the size of the National Mall? And are those buildings, how tall are they? Do you have an actual study that shows that to us?
I don't have anything with dimensions on it, but this is 1,000 feet across from here to each block is about 500 feet, if that helps with reference. So 500, 500, 500, and so on.
Okay. Because in space making, as you all know, those dimensions matter. The height matters versus the length. You may create a space that may actually become sterile at one point if there's no activity going. Mm-hmm. The fact that you are creating a stadium in the city surrounded by neighborhoods, that is great because that's what the National Stadium in DC did and was a catalyst for the whole Southwest renewal. So that is all good stuff. My comments are more around the technicality of that and the scale of that relative to the buildings around it. But otherwise, great.
Where is the metro stop and either?
Right here.
Way over there. There's nothing closer.
Not existing, no.
Yeah.
It's a half mile for reference.
Okay.
10-minute walk.
It would be handy if the stadium was closer, because most people, if they can in an urban environment, would try to take a train or metro. I too am a little concerned about this location relative to your elegant solution to the site plan. I think it could be more figural within the context of that plan. I'm surprised there are no flags flying, off the roofs. At least identify that there's a, because it looks like it could be a governmental building, or you've downplayed it almost too much. I mean, you've been too successful, too modest, Peter, with the whole thing. I think it's an important. I mean, you're spending millions of dollars on this thing, and you want people to come to it and use it all the time. And something needs to animate your huge park. And I just can't imagine people wandering around in that park, pushing baby carriages. And I think if you had the stadium there, you could give it a little bit more energy. But that's just me. That's a personal opinion. It's not something that, one can argue over the whole thing. I think the location of it will depend more on access and being able to get buses, parking, food service, metro stop, and all that. And you had the map of all those things, but it would have been nice to see it superimposed on one of these drawings where all those things happen. So you can see how it reinforces the idea, just as a way of making it clear how it works. The drawings are gorgeous. And I was commenting earlier how much your opening drawing looks like those renderings of Chicago that were done for Burnham's plan. the way the coloration works and the fading of it. So obviously you had either a lot of training before you came to architecture school, or you spent a lot of time on the computer, because you can really manipulate it. But I worry that it's such a set piece. It's so 19, Chicago exhibition scale, and that you spent a lot of time making sure that you could reprogram all the spaces. It needs a yacht basin. You've got sort of one started up, but I'm looking for the life in the project a little bit. But the stadium is off to the right, buried on the river. I don't know. It does make a better scale for it. And anyway, I'm just rambling. I'll pass this on.
How many seats?
60,000.
60. You showed a soccer field in there. I don't think a soccer field, you have to be bigger for a soccer field. Because a soccer field,
Yes.
a football field is smaller than a soccer field.
Right. So there's a 30-foot buffer for a football field, a gap where the sidelines are, and then that would be fully occupied by the soccer field itself.
Well, it's interesting that you are sort of hiding the stadium in a sense. I'm not sure what all of the uses are, if you mentioned, that are underneath of the
subterranean uses?
No, not even the subterranean, the stuff that's at street level.
Oh, sure. So in the corners here would be restaurants, and these would face out and also have an entrance to the inside of the stadium, and then these would be bars, and then all the circulation restrooms are tucked into the corners.
But in this section, what's all of that stuff in there?
So this area here, that's the atrium, that's the second level concourse for the fans using the upper grandstands, and then this is an office space.
Okay.
And then up above that would be the press boxes.
That's interesting. My firm has been involved with the DC United soccer stadium. Our involvement is really sort of somewhat minimal, some of the interior design stuff. But watching the process with Populous, which they're like the state of the art for doing this stuff, was amazing. The first thing they did, I was surprised, was 3D sections. Sections. It was so important. And so I'm looking at your sight lines. Sight lines are so important. And some of this looks like the sight lines might be compromised, but I guess you're saying that there's a 30-foot buffer before you get to the field. You just have to be careful you're not looking through people just to see, the lines. And I do think it's small for soccer. I think it's only football. So I guess my question is, what football team did you see coming here? Because that's important.
I can't say it, Professor Hill.
You said it to me?
The Red Hook Hookers.
I'm sorry I asked that. Okay.
He made
Well, it's interesting because where the DC United Stadium is going, in a very similar area that's really it was historically highly industrial, but before that there had been, because of urban renewal, there had been neighborhoods there, so that was all wiped out. And then it became industrial, concrete plants, Pepco, all that stuff. And it seems like that's where you started with, a similar sort of area. And the point I want to make is that we had to take this design through the Office of Planning, Historic Preservation. And I was surprised that they did not want the stadium hidden. They wanted to look like the infrastructure of the area, to be consistent with the industrial stuff that was there, to see the bones of the structure, to tell that it's a stadium. The canopy was a very important feature that they really wanted to see and not to hide that stuff. So it's interesting that you took more of, the precedents that you were looking at. You had an opportunity here to make something that would have been, bonier, yes. And so I recommend, because the DC United Stadium is only the 28,000 seating capacity, so it's not as big as what you have here. But you should go take a look at it. It's under construction, and what you see is almost what's going to end up. There's no idea about making facade. It's industrial. Yes. So me as a sort of bystander watching this process was really cool because I thought it would have, if you look at where the Nationals played, they kind of tried to hide it and make it look more urban, but just on the other side of South Capitol, industrial, and that was the attitude. And I think you went to some of this sort of Beaux-Arts sort of attitude that you forced over the entire site, where it might have been more interesting to go with the gritty, urban stuff. So, having said that, though, that you have gone with the sort of Beaux-Arts sort of scheme, I mean, you have just buried the stadium, and people, they want to go to an event and have that sense of arrival, and that there's that action and those sort of things that are going on. And so it's sort of interesting if you decide to just hide it.
I was thinking about the National Stadium and how it's come to life more, that whole area, now that they've built up the residential area fabric of that part of town. I really appreciate you're showing us the different the stadium and your site in different times of the year and with different activities. I wonder whether, not knowing exactly what this waterway is, but did you think about something about the kayaks in the middle makes me want it on this outside? And did you think about creating a promenade or something that activates the other side of the building, of the stadium, at the water's edge, that might also provide overflow for the different restaurants that are there?
You're seeing the water activities on that basin down here, and you want to see more water activities out here.
Yes, we do.
I thought about it. That is actually a pretty active channel for barge traffic. The metro, yes, correct. The metro is right now. It's on this side of the canal. This is the canal running through here, and this is a pretty actively trafficked area for loading and unloading with barges. So I thought this would be a little bit more safer, out of the way. You could actually close this off, as similar to how they do in Buffalo at the canal side project, where they shut off the water so water can't get in. They can freeze it. It can be cleaned for swimming, or it could be opened up, and you can pass all the way through those bridges.
So I think you have done a remarkable job of taking an opportunity as a thesis student and overlay this dreamland to it. It's very evocative. The drawings are beautiful. I look at that summertime in the basin, and I'm like in pre-World War I London somewhere, looking at the Victoria and Albert Museum in the distance. I swear they've got parasols, the guy's got a pun. I mean, it's just very romantic, and I think you've done a very good job, a very strong job of kind of connecting all this the existing park, and just kind of reimagining it, with something that we kind of don't, it's kind of out of style, right, in our modern world. So I think it's a really interesting idea that you would go here, that you would go to this place, this romantic, visionary place. Just two more comments. I'll reiterate the comment that I said before, which is I think you're missing a water plan. We did the Buffalo project, and we always start with a water plan. What happens what are you doing in the water? Kayaking, fishing, hunting, crabbing, whatever, and then how does that inform the edge of the land? We're working with Populous on a project, and my friend there, Brad, was bemoaning the fact that arenas and stadiums, all they are now is a wrapper for billboards. So the reality is that this is going to be the Goldman Sachs Stadium or something like that, and they don't give a excuse me. All they care about is seeing their name, whether it's Audi, or whatever, and so again, I'm not holding that against you because you've transported us to somewhere else where all these kind of reality we don't have to deal with quite as intensely. But anyway, it's lovely.
Thank you.
I'm just curious. I'm fascinated about stadium design, and I'm wondering. And I see that you did a lot of studies and broke it up into pieces and studied the sections and all that. Have you given a thought of making the stadium be like a transformer of sorts, where you don't need to assemble the stage, but actually it comes out of the bleachers? Or is there any thoughts about having the building do that actually?
Absolutely, yeah. We pursued that. I got a little demonstration model here.
Oh, cool.
You can move, you can slide, cover
Awesome.
the street.
All right.
So we definitely pursued that. At some point it became the tail wagging the dog, and I pursued instead this idea of how Wrigley Field is composed with a building across the street. So there's actually a small street that can operate in between. It has a bridge at the end of it.
I'm always fascinated about that, like Millennium Park in Chicago, that the big canopy moves and the whole thing works that way. So it's very interesting.
Was the reason you chose baseball stadiums to analyze as your favorite contextual models and then did a football stadium?
Yes. So I have a generous grandmother who sent me across America to visit these stadiums. So I have great experiences going there. And then I realized that there are modern baseball stadiums that have been done contextually and in urban scales. But this football stadium, 60,000 seat stadiums aren't. And it's a problem, and I thought that would be appropriate for a thesis project to address why that's the case.
Why'd you call it a mega stadium?
A mega
Why
stadium?
did you call it a mega stadium? It doesn't seem like 60,000 seats is so big. I mean, University of Michigan football stadium seats, what, 110? So
This is true.
So why did you refer to it as?
Well, there's still some of the biggest stadiums. I mean, there are a handful of, there's 10 stadiums that are 80,000 seats or more, but when we could think, and I would assume a mega stadium means 60,000 seats or more. That was sort of my assumption, but baseball stadiums tend to see 35 to 45,000. That's something more common. Soccer stadiums are similar. So the next step up is 60,000 and on up to Michigan's level. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Peter, I think this is an amazing project. And I might be the only one here who can appreciate the fact that, you showed a slide early on, which was the spark of your interest, which had to do with the sort of one or two streets adjacent to the several stadiums that you love. And it was all about this building in about a 4-block area. And I think in this project that if you applied that sort of specifically and narrowly to this project, that it would be about the life on the street that would happen somewhere in here, having to do with going between the metro stop and where you decided to put your ballpark. And somehow or other, in the course of this project, by the circumstances of where you located it and so on and so forth, you undertook to basically solve, 8 more problems. So I decided to go to wherever this is, Red Hook, Brooklyn, or whatever. So now I have to deal with all this water situation. I have to deal with this remediation of this giant site. I have to deal with reinventing an urban environment, and so on and so forth. And it just kept growing and growing. And to me, it seems like you've done an absolutely incredible job of tackling one problem after another, and actually solving it, at a pretty sophisticated level. I mean, whatever issues we might be able to find here, they're certainly minimal. relative to the scale of the issues that you took on, the level of resolution. It's absolutely incredible. I happened to walk by here a little earlier today, and I wish these were bigger. All these studies, this urban environment that you did, and then coming down to a whole series. These are much alike, but the very, very careful studies of different schemas for how you would treat those open spaces. It's really a marvelous, marvelous condition. So, I mean, that might sound summary, and I don't necessarily mean it to be, but I just appreciate the extent to which you've gone on to take on these other issues.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we need to learn to do as architects is tell a beautiful story. Of course, we have to solve all these technical problems and issues and what to do with the remediation, all that stuff, but the storytelling here is really commendable.
I have a comment, and it's not anything to do with you. Years ago, I went to a Cal Stanford game at the Stanford Stadium, and we had seats that were like in the third or fourth row down by the end zone. When you're sitting there, the game is all in elevation. You see nothing. You see just movement, and it stops unless they're in your end zone. There's got to be some way to. With baseball stadiums, that's not a problem. You can sit anywhere and you kind of see the whole thing. Football, if you're sitting low near the end zone, you don't see the game. There's got to be some way to rearrange stadiums.
That's what the big jumbotron screens are for. And you're actually describing something that happened several years ago in Chicago, where a big fog bank rolled in on Soldier Field, and the televised program couldn't be seen anymore, so they decided to put all the just use the cameras on the field, and the game made no sense at all. You're absolutely right. So you have to have it up above. You guys have anything else to say? I'm not going to jump in here and talk for a second. We might wrap it up a little bit. What?
Not at all.
Okay.
Please do.
So this is one of those projects, critics can become involved in projects sometimes and have a deep passion for the project and want to drive the bus with a student. And this is one where I had total objectivity and complete distance from it. So some of you may know that my dad was an athletic director in the high school I went to. And several years ago when he retired, one of the people that got up and did a testimonial to him said, "Oh, and at every single game that Coach Kelly was coaching at, there was Jackie watching every single aspect of the game, and there was Brian drawing the scoreboard." And I have absolutely no personal interest in this whatsoever. I was totally objective as a critic. And I think I would be wrong if I didn't acknowledge two people that brought you through this. One was David Schwartz's office, and this is kind of an infomercial for those of you that have completed Architecture 600. David Schwartz offers a $10,000 fellowship to students here at Maryland every year to compete for this fellowship, and then to work in his office in the summer, and then to travel. And Peter won that last year, and traveled and went to a lot of different stadia and ballparks all throughout Europe. And that was, I think, really eye-opening for you and a passion. You came back and I had to sit through all those slides of stadia. And why didn't you go over here? There's something great over there. Get it. Anyhow. The other person was Glenn McCullough, who is a good friend of the school. Has taught here in the past, and Glenn is an expert on ballpark design. Worked with Schwartz's office on the Rangers ballpark in Arlington, Texas, and has done a lot of other stuff. Worked with Gensler, now is on his own. And Glenn provided a lot of the line of sight stuff that that you were talking about, Michael. And so he's been a mentor in this project. Couldn't be here today, but it's it was kind of good to acknowledge that. So that's number 3. Number 4 is getting back to this. Show us this skull and the mask. And as somebody that has, in my lifetime, continually gone between being too much mask and then perhaps not enough skull, and then kind of going back down to skull again, sort of wondering, we were at a point a couple weeks ago where we were all skull. And the skull wasn't really working, and I think that perhaps I came along and insisted on a mask, and I think this is a response to a point in time, and I think all of us agree that there's more to be done. And I just think about the mask part of this and the skull part of this. Okay, change. I want to go to breakfast for a moment. So I want to talk eggs. So most football stadia are hard-boiled eggs. They sit out there. There's nothing you can do about them. They have a perimeter. They're just an object. They really just, they're bombers inside of parking lots. They're just hard-boiled eggs. You've ended up with a poached egg. Neatly poached in the way in which you buy one of those poachers, Teflon lined or stainless steel, and you put a little butter in it, and put it in the water, and you put the egg in top. It has a perfect perimeter and a perfect yolk, and it's tasty as all hell. You never want to have a scrambled egg for something like this. Scrambled eggs happen naturally, a mess, that's not what you want to do. I was preoccupied with fried egg. And if there is this kind of ambiguity in where the scheme has gone, I was preoccupied with perhaps one of the solutions might be the Plaza Mayor in Madrid. We had talked about it a couple of times. Come back. I was walking around with architectural Velcro, trying to all the time kind of put new things on, glom them onto this thing, bury the stadium, make it go away entirely. And so if this is not asserting itself as a stadium, the critic has imposed a lot of that in the case, but the critic, it failed because the critic never got his fried egg, which we know fried eggs only work, you can't break the yolk with the fried egg. The fried egg is a compositional device, has the yolk, it is circular, and it organizes the perimeter, which is irregular, and that is the Plaza Mayor, and that's what I was hoping for, but I didn't get it, but I'll still talk to you, so there's no problem with that. Finally, somebody mentioned the studies. Peter's it's been interesting watching Peter. I met Peter several years ago. He showed up in my office in the summer before he was a student. He brought me this portfolio. He was a really polite guy. Came in with his wife, and we had this conversation. She opened up this he's kind of a kid from Wheaton College showing up in my door, and I guess I knew you were coming. I don't know if I knew you were. Yeah, you did. You showed up unannounced. That's right, cold call. And he comes in and he starts showing me this portfolio, and he says, "Do you think I have a chance, Coach? Can I join the club?" So, yeah, I think you have a chance, but you have to go through the whole process. So it was really kind of fun. Peter came to us with a background in literature, and as Steve will tell you, one of the most frustrating things about working with Peter in Pro Thesis was that he can write really fast, which meant that he didn't bother to write anything until the very last minute, in which case it was really nerve-wracking for us because we were like, oh, don't worry, I'll write that. And then it was there, boom. But not everybody can do that, so it was kind of frightening. So that's the kind of background story with this project. I think one of the things I would just mention is very ambitious because it takes everything from a vast urban scale, deals with, we've been talking about this as a river, but that ain't no river, that's the Gowanus Canal. So that's one of the most toxic places in America, which the stadium butts up against, the Gowanus Canal here. Perhaps it's subliminally in the mindset of Peter, I don't know, that maybe he hasn't quite yet valued the potential future of the Gowanus Canal. But there's a large scale, almost regional, bigger than a neighborhood scale, almost a city scale kind of gesture that he's making. He's making the park is perhaps competitive with Grant Park in Chicago in terms of its pretension. This promenade across the site, the kind of seasonal aspect of it, down to the fact that we end up with a fairly well thought through idea about section, despite the fact that some people may be anti putting the building underground, allowing it up above ground, and it would have been nice to have some facts as to how much water it could hold. So I think there's a kind of tour de force up here, and then the fly-throughs. I think that was very, very helpful to all of us to get a sense of the flavor of what's going on. You've been very ambitious. These little projects with the flapping and wacky stadia stuff were really important because they were outside of the box things. And I think that they could come back in and they could perhaps solve that problem of too much mask now. Maybe they could kind of bring us back to a point where the skull and the mask come into better balance, where it looks more like a supermodel and not like a dead guy, or not like I did in August. So that's something to think about. I'm going to miss Peter because Peter's one of the only students I know that I can walk up to and do Gilbert and Sullivan, and he can do it back with me. And so it's going to be really sad to see him go, but I'm sure you have a great future. So cheers.
Thank you.